All right, so this is really just an introduction to IPC. So just explaining what IPC is. IPC stands for Integrated Physics and Chemistry. So in this class, we're going to be talking about physics and chemistry, but we're going to start off with chemistry, and then towards the second half of the class of the course, we're going to talk about physics. Just a little bit about chemistry to start off with. So, chemistry is just a branch of science that deals with the identification of the substances of which matter is composed. So, basically, everything in this whole universe, from the things here on Earth to planets to stars to outer space, even this invisible air that we're breathing, it's all matter. And matter is just anything that has mass. So, kind of like it weighs something and takes up space, right? And so, again, pretty much everything is made of matter. And so, we're going to focus on that. We're going to look at matter in all its different forms, and we're going to investigate their properties in the ways that the different types of matter interact with each other, the way they combine, and the way they change when they do interact with each other. And the use of these processes to form new substances, right? So again, just think of everything in this whole world, and even in outer space, and again, other stars and things, as like a bunch of Legos, right? A bunch of different building blocks. And so we're going to talk again about how those building blocks act individually, how they act when they're combined, and how they change when they get together, and especially to form new substances. So chemistry is important because it's in our daily lives, right? Everything around us is chemistry. Even us, like if you think about people or living things, we are just a bunch of chemicals that evolved to the point where we can actually think and feel and be self-aware, right? So in our daily lives, though, we always see chemistry in things like new materials, new pharmaceuticals. If you want to go into any of these fields, you have to be good at chemistry. And so new energy sources require knowing about chemistry, new food supplies, especially now that we're running out of different like farming land and things like that. How do you grow things with limited space and supplies? Then can you all think of any others? Think about that. Think in your everyday lives, like what things are made of chemistry. And so chemistry deals with the natural world, right? We think of chemicals and we think of like factories and making things, but chemistry is all around us, right? The air that we breathe, the gas that we exhale, the sugars that we eat to keep our bodies going. These are all things that happen in the natural world, right? And as you see in this GIF right here, this is the aurora borealis or the northern lights, and just all those colors that are coming up are all due to chemistry. And so it's also important in your education. It helps you to gather and organize information. And this is very important as a student, but also if you want to be successful in any career, this is going to be an important skill to have. And so it talks about qualitative and quantitative information. And we'll talk about this in more detail, but qualitative information is just that information that really doesn't have to do with numbers. And quantitative information is data that does have to do with numbers, right? Or information that has to do with numbers. And always think quantitative, quantity, and quantity means numbers, right? That should help you remember that. Then remember, it helps you analyze. So learning about chemistry will also help you learn to find patterns in information. And that's also very important in almost any career you have. It suggests, and not just in your career, but in your everyday lives, it's always important to find patterns so that you can help almost like predict what's going to happen. It's going to help you learn to analyze complex system. And there are a lot of jobs where even in your everyday life, right? If you have all these complicated things going on and you're able to break them down and separate them and kind of organize them, then it helps you learn a lot about what you're going through. It can also help you develop skills, and like I mentioned earlier, to predict future events based on patterns of behavior, right? So by knowing how to break things down and analyze it, you can almost even predict what's going to happen. And we're going to do some labs in here where you're going to be asked to, based off of like the data that you collected, try to predict what's going to happen in like the next trial. And so it also helps you to develop problem solving skills using a systematic approach. And this is what every employer wants. So even if you don't plan on being a scientist, uh, problem solving skills or critical thinking skills are one of the most highly sought after traits in an employee that any employer wants, right? So again, if you can master IPC or science, then it is going to prepare you for a lot of different jobs, a lot of different careers, and just to be more successful in your everyday life. So some concepts that we're going to cover in this class are going to be the scientific method, which is pretty much where we're going to start off. And then we're going to be talking about the states of matter, solids, liquids, and gases, and what those look like, atoms and their subatomic particles, chemical bonds, and then balancing chemical equations. So that's pretty much going to be what we're going to talk about in the chemistry part of this class. So now that we talked a little bit about what to expect in the chemistry part of the class and what chemistry is, let's talk a little bit about physics. So physics is just how physics deals with the structure of matter and how the basic parts of the universe interact, right? And what's really cool about physics is it's especially what we're going to be talking about. It's things that you go through in everyday life, things that you see, that you experience. But physics is really cool because it kind of dives deep down into like the mathematical part of what you do. So things as like simple as like a car accident, right? Well, I guess they're not really simple, but something like a car accident, there is math behind a car accident, right? How much force a car has, the speed it's going, the impact at which it hits a wall. And so, you can put numbers to all of these things and calculate how much damage can occur during a car accident with all the different parts of that accident. Again, the size of the car, the speed of the car, the object it hits, all of these things you can put numbers behind and solve different parts of the problem. Very important when it comes to like car safety. But there are other areas in our daily lives where physics come into play, and that's one of the reasons why it's important. So, like electricity in our homes, that has a lot to do with physics. Our vehicles' aerodynamics, and not just our like cars, but you think of airplanes and trains and things like that, have a lot to do with physics. And so, yeah, the vehicle's aerodynamics have a lot to do with that. Air conditioning is also, and refrigeration, also very important, right? Things that allow us to have the flexibility and freedom that we have right now that our ancestors really didn't have, right? Especially when it comes to refrigeration. So physics is very important in figuring a lot of these things out. And as I mentioned earlier, car safety, right? You need to know a lot about the math that goes behind impacts or car crashes in order to improve some of those safety measures like seat belts and airbags and brakes and things like that. So physics goes a long way to explaining a lot of that and helping solve some of these problems. And so the concepts in physics that we're going to cover include the metric system, density, Newton's three laws of motion, knowing how to calculate speed, time and distance, momentum, and force, right? So these are all things that we're going to focus on during the second part of this term having to do with physics. So a little bit more math involved in the physics and in chemistry, but chemistry will also involve a little bit of math. All right, so solving problems using a scientific approach. So this includes both physics and chemistry. It's important that you know how to solve problems. Again, this is one of the things, if you are great at problem solving, then you're going to be a great employee, a great supervisor, manager, a business owner, whatever it is that you want to do, right? You'll be a lot more successful in that if you know how to define a problem, right? First step in any problem is knowing what the problem is. And then you got to be really good at researching and gathering that information, right? You got to know the facts, you got to observe what's going on. And again, the first step. Then once you get a bunch of different information and data based off the problem, you want to propose solutions, right? So organize your information and look for patterns, right? See what things might be successful if you try to implement them to solve a problem. So a hypothesis is just a guess based off of a lot of information that you gathered, right? A lot of people will refer to it as an educated guess. So then you want to evaluate your proposed solutions. You're going to have to test your patterns by using them to predict what's going to happen. And these are what are known as experiments. And we're actually going to do some experiments this term to test out some hypotheses that you might have. So that, and we're going to cover that in more detail, problem solving or the scientific method, but this is going to be very important to you all as students. The best way to learn about chemistry and physics are to do these things right here that are mentioned. So definitely you want to learn the vocabulary, definitions of terms and how common vocabulary is applied to IPC. And so like science a lot of times has its own language. So it's very important that the first step is just learning the vocabulary of the course. Make sure that you memorize important information, things like names, formulas, and charges of polyatomic ions. And so we'll learn more about what those mean, but it's an important part of learning chemistry is also being able to memorize important info. So learn the vocabulary, memorize important information, and also learn and practice processes. especially when we get to like balancing chemical equations and doing metric conversions. It's very important that you do quite a few repetitions, quite a few examples, so that you learn the process.